Yeah, I know, I mean, like, growing up, I was a Star Trek, nerd. Like, I was pretty young when Next Generation started, so, it was, when that show came on every week, it was, shut up, sit down and watch it.
Yeah.
And, I mean, I grew up, some of the first toys that I ever remember, kind of, I don't know what the right word is, but like, coveting, I guess, were the Star Wars toys. And I had a neighbor who had tons of them and had the Falcon, had the walkers and all that stuff, had all the cool stuff, but like, he was obsessed with keeping them all in pristine condition, even though they were all outside of the box and all that stuff. And, I would like, I had my hands on a couple of figures. I always wanted a Luke. I don't really think I ever got one. I think maybe I had a Vader. But, I was nuts about sci-fi, even as a kid. But I think the cool thing with the Star Wars had that kind of mystical element. It had the, that sort of sword and sorcery vibe, but it was all high-tech and, you know. But also the other really cool thing about it was that, like, in Star Trek, everything was kind of, in an odd way, everything was kind of sterile and very clean. And whereas Star Wars was very lived in, it was very grimy and dirty.
Yep. And all the worlds were, that's one thing I can remember back on when I was a kid watching the movies and getting into the figures, which I didn't get nearly into that as much as I did like G.I. Joe figures, which was maybe a couple years after Star Wars. Because, when Jedi was released, I was 3. So I've been told I went and saw it at the theater, which I've said to my parents, you monsters, like, what did you do to all the people in this movie theater that had to watch this with a 3-year-old? But, so I don't recall seeing them when they came out. Obviously, A New Hope came out before I was born, and Empire came out the year I was born. But I do remember early on watching them and being just totally in, And at that time, like, you couldn't find... I remember maybe a few years after the fact, I remember being with my grandmother, and she was watching me or something, and we were at like a J.C. Penney's, which you think of that now, and you're like, well, they don't have toys.
Yeah.
But then, it was just a department store, and I remember I got a Boba Fett action figure, and I was like, come on, please get me this. Like, I didn't even know who Boba Fett was. I just knew he was this minor character in Return of the Jedi. And I completely had forgotten about Empire at that point, when I was a kid. And so I got that. And I remember liking Boba Fett before Boba Fett became this huge thing, because I had that one action figure that was Boba Fett, All the other action figures I had were Han and Darth and Luke and Leia and stuff. So that was, I don't know. I kind of watched a little bit of Star Trek The Next Generation, but it never enveloped me as much as the Star Wars stuff did. And I think maybe it's a lot of what you said. It's like that lived in, like that voyeur perspective you have of this world, but this whole galaxy universe that's completely fleshed out, colorful. There's all kinds of characters that you never get more than a glimpse of, and that just adds to the richness of the whole. Yeah,
that was one thing I think that JJ did really well when he took over Star Trek, was that everything remained very polished and very sterile, but it had that sort of, high tech but very retro kind of vibe, and the cast that he pulled together to replace the originals is perfect.
He did a really good job.
Yeah, and so hearing that he was going over to Star Wars, I wasn't, there was this whole, explosion on the net where it was like, oh my God, JJ's taking over, da da da, and I'm sitting there going, like, he's gonna crush it, and
the lens flare memes will continue on.
Yeah, and for me, I don't really. I have my reservations about Episode 7. even yet. But it's a new generation. It's a whole new game, and I think JJ's gonna crush the hell out of the next trilogy. I think it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah.
At least I hope so.
Yeah, I'm excited.
All right, well, roll the music.
All right.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Friday Night Rights, a podcast about storytelling. My name's Fuzz. With me, as always, is Jonesy.
Hey everyone.
And tonight we're going to talk about Star Wars. But first, we're going to go through the usual. We're going to talk a little bit about the website and talk a little bit about the aftermath of NaNoWriMo and the stories that we're working on. So, Jonesy, how's the website going?
Well, it's still pretty static at the moment. We are at FridayNightWrites.net, and what we've built there is a storytelling community where people of all stripes, all experience levels can come and tell their stories and talk about storytelling. That's what we're really after. So it gives you an opportunity to post your fiction, or just to read some fiction and get in there and comment on what other people have written, everything like that. What we're trying to do is get a conversation started about storytelling, and that's what the community's built for, and we're hoping to get a little bit more life pumped back into the website in the coming weeks.
Yeah. The time of year is going to be rough.
Yeah, for sure.
And
we've been bogged down with NaNoWriMo and all that good stuff as well, so... That's kind of put a damper on our management of the site. But I'll just run through some of the particulars real quick. Please give us a visit at FridayNightWrites.net. We are also on Facebook at Facebook.com/FNWrites. We're on Twitter at Twitter.com/FNWrites. And our YouTube page is YouTube.com/FNWrites. All the podcasts are posted in video form there. There's a handy playlist. I'll have all of Season 1 on that playlist once this one's posted later this week. The podcast feed is podcasts.FridayNightWrites.net. You can plug that into... You can get our RSS feed there, or our feed burner link is there. If you can plug that into whatever podcast app you're using, if it's not iTunes. But speaking of iTunes, we're also on iTunes. Just search for Friday Night Rights. And if you'd like to provide any feedback, hate mail, or comments, please direct those to fnrights@gmail.com. And if you enjoy the podcast, please tell your friends. That's word of mouth is a good effective way for us to get some more conversation going about storytelling.
Yeah,
sure.
And even if you're a writer, or even if you're a half-ass writer, getting involved with other writers is, it only helps.
It's helped me a bunch.
So, get off your ass and do it.
Yeah! And you can leave us a review on iTunes or YouTube at any time. That helps us also.
Yeah, we like seeing stuff on YouTube. Makes us happy.
Yeah, for sure. And you can subscribe in both of those places as well. So that's all the clerical work that needs to be done.
Cool.
So tell me about NaNoWriMo.
Well, now that NaNoWriMo is said and done, and the stress is over, and all that stuff, I've managed to make some pretty serious headway into the story that I was working on. And I was chatting with a couple of friends of mine who are writers, authors, I should say, and I sent them the sort of preliminary stuff that I've finished, and I was lucky enough to get back a lot of really good feedback of people saying, looks like you've been editing as you go, because like every chapter seems like it's a finished piece, and everybody was really really kind about it. I expected at least some negative stuff, and there was a couple of critiques that I listened to them. I'm going to completely ignore them, but
they weren't necessarily constructive.
Well, they were constructive in the sense of how people have that tendency to say what I would do,
mm-hmm.
and then they sort of run off with this idea, and you just kind of go, yeah, that's great, but that has nothing to do with what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's not my story.
Yeah. So and another problem with that, which is something that's really hard to get through to people, is that like if someone does say, hey, my idea is this, and this, and you go and you do that, and then that story turns out to sell a bunch of copies, and they turn around on you and go, yeah, I totally gave you that story, and I'm going to sue your ass for it.
Yeah.
And they can, and they'll probably win. So anytime I get any, story ideas, stuff like that, unless it's like somebody that I'm deliberately sitting down to say, here's my ideas, where do you, and those are always people like you, Brent, Sean, guys like that I know I can trust, and I know aren't going to hold that over my head. So, but yeah, when it's people that, I know as sort of semi-beta readers and stuff like that, yeah, no, like I'm not going to be like, yeah, that's a great, even if it is a great idea, I'm not going to be like, yeah, I'm going to take that. No, I'm not going to touch it.
Yeah.
And you have to tell people that, I appreciate your input, but I can't use this because it's yours. So, but I've had a great time doing what I've been doing. I've been slowly kind of cranking away at it, and, I've been trying to ramp up the horror in it, in such a way that I feel like still pays respect to the story and the ideas that I have for the overall piece, but still, kind of makes the overall thing maybe a little more, a little more tense of a read, and that's been fun.
I know that I read the third chapter, which was a real big moment in the story, about the murders.
Yeah.
And I felt that was... I felt you hit the nail right on the head with it.
Cool.
I really felt that tension and all that you're probably going for in a scene like that.
Yeah.
Which, and I mean, I have kids, and there's kids involved, and so anytime you do that, I'm like,
yeah,
you son of a bitch.
Yeah.
It's like killing the dog in the story.
Yeah. I know with the chapter 3, it was, and I think I talked to you about it, that, I kept dialing it back, and I kept dialing it back, and finally I just got to a point where I was like, I'm probably going to have to do this off camera, just out of respect for the reader. I don't want to be grotesque about this stuff, but I do want it to be, genuinely something scary. And so instead of showing what happens to the brother, I switched over to the sister in the middle of that scene, so that you get that the monster is there in the room with the boy. But then we cut to the sister hiding in the closet, and and I felt that worked a little bit better.
Yeah.
And in chapter 4, with the aftermath of that, it was such a fun kind of thing to write, because of the way that the murders happen and how they're just blatantly unnatural, but in a way that's, it's off-putting. And I knew that I really wanted to kind of pull my readers in a little bit, because there's a lot of supernatural stuff going on in the story, just from the get-go. And my biggest kind of fear is that I don't want to acclimate the reader to the supernatural, so that they feel like, oh, well, here's some more supernatural stuff. We'll just get through that, So, I've spent a lot more time with my spectral spelunker characters, the ghost hunters,
Ghost facers.
Yeah, and spending time with those characters because they're the sort of everyman kind of everyday Joe that's,
right.
Kind of guiding some of the story. So, but I've had a blast with it. I'm really happy.
That's great.
How far or how more, if any, have you gotten on?
I haven't gotten anything committed that's a part of the actual story, but I've made a lot of progress on mapping out. I've went back and I've rehashed a couple of times now the entirety of my story arc. What I've done a lot of in the last week and a half is fleshing out characters that, in the midst of writing the first 5 chapters, I've said, this is a much bigger deal than I expected, so I need to have more to this character. So I've spent a lot of time doing that. I've spent a lot of time outlining my settings and where my story is going to go. Because what I have now is all pretty much introductory, right? Mm-hmm. So now I need to drive the story to the end, basically, or to where it's going to be a jumping off point into something else or whatever happens. Mm-hmm. So I've really sat down and tried to sharpen where that is going to go. I still have more work to do. I'm not entirely happy with what I have down now, but that's what I want to have finished by this week. Yeah, is I want those characters fleshed and I want that story arc defined. And that's kind of my goal. My goal is to have that done by Friday. It might be Saturday, but that's kind of what I'm looking for.
That's cool, though. I think that, and considering how little prep we did for NaNoWriMo.
We'll do better next time.
Yeah, sure. We knew what we were going to do, but then we were just like, we'll just do it. And, as soon as you get into it, you realize that, it should be NaNoWriMo starts on November 1st. But pre-NaNoWriMo begins on October 1st.
Or September 1st.
Yeah, and it's just to build your storyline in that month or two, and then start writing it in November.
And really, and that draws back to podcasts ago with motivation and this whole, I sit down to write, and I don't know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. You're going to flounder.
I'm going to go watch YouTube.
Yeah,
for sure. So... or something else, or I'm going to listen to a podcast or whatever. I'm not going to sit down and laser focus on that task.
Yeah.
And I sat down December 1st on the Tuesday after NaNoWriMo was over, and I sat down and I wrote about 800 words about what I learned, right? Mm-hmm. So just thoughts about my motivational levels and my energy levels and when I was best at producing content and everything like this, and it all came back to plan more. That'll set all of this up to be way more successful next time.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I've taken to very much so is the idea of get a corkboard, a big ass corkboard, and then get a bunch of note cards and a bright red marker or whatever color that suits your fancy that's not black, and then sit down on your computer or on your pad of paper or whatever it may be, and then just start working out those beats for each chapter and just work each chapter as an individual, so that each chapter 1 I need to get from here to here, chapter 2 new characters, get from here to here, chapter 3 new characters, here to here. Okay, now I got my A, B, and C cast for chapters 1, 2, and 3, and then I'm just going to keep recycling that same order until I get to the end. Okay, cool. I'm going to do that, and now every story beat, you just write down that card, what that story beat is, and then you start on the far left-hand corner of your corkboard, and you just start putting those up, so that at any given point in time, you can look up at that corkboard, and you can go, well, where do I need to go? Where do I need to get this chapter done and be on task? Okay, this is where I have to be. Here's my story beats. And what's cool is that you've got the gaps in between those cards where you just see blank corkboard. And there's all sorts of really great, wonderful things that can happen in between there, where you can add in intermissions with other characters. You can do all kinds of things. And, but as long as you've prepared, then you're going to be so much better off.
Yeah.
Just the idea, I was chatting with a friend of mine. She's a young writer. Well, she's pushing 30 now, but when I met her, she was very young. And she has been working on a sort of Tolkien-esque kind of / Harry Potter sort of semi-children's fiction, semi-older children's fiction sort of idea. And she had been telling me that she was having a lot of trouble because she had gotten about 3/4 of the way through the story, and then she went back and she reread it, and she didn't like it, and she was having a hard time thinking about the ending. And we sat down over the course of about 2.5 hours, and she sent me what she had written, which was entirely too much to read in one sitting. And so I told her, just give me a couple days, I'll read it over. And then we got back together, and we were online chatting back and forth, and I said, okay, cool, here's this, and this. And, it looks like you're doing the hero's journey, but it looks like you're not following through with the hero's journey.
Right.
Looks like you're making up a bunch of shit to throw into the hero's journey because apparently it's not good enough for you. Mm-hmm. And I was like, but the problem is that it is perfect. By design, by what it is, it's perfect. Don't mess with the hero's journey. Just use it. And she's just like, well, everybody else has done it, and everybody talks about it. Yeah. And I'm like, just do it. Shave off this part, this part, this part, this part. Get rid of these characters. You don't need them. They're pointless to the story. They're just characters that are analogs for yourself and your boyfriend. You don't need them. Dump them. Stick with these characters. Work these characters, a little more in depth. They're really great, but they are archetypes at this point. Tell me more about them. Dig into them, a little deeper. Go back and just fluff up what you've already written with more stuff. Focus on that villain. Let me know where that villain is and where his road is heading and where his road intersects with your hero. Your villain is just floundering. Your villain is just being bad. Well, that's all well and good, but until the hero and the villain have some reason to intersect, then you're just reading two stories.
Yeah.
And so, she took a lot of it to heart, and I know, she's going to ignore a lot of it, but the point is that, the resources are out there, and if you just prepare before, then you're not going to be 3/4 of a way through a 300,000 word novel and saying to yourself, man, I don't know where to go. I'm having trouble. I got writer's block. I've hit a wall. Whatever the excuses may be, or I should say reasons, but whatever the reasons may be, if you just prepare,
yep,
then you're good to go. You're gonna see the path clear.
Absolutely.
And no matter what garbage gets thrown in your way, you're going to be able to overcome it because you're going to see the end.
Yeah, and I know for a fact it wasn't life got in the way, or all that stuff's there. Yeah. Obviously, we're all busy, right? So that was all there. I had time to write. Mm-hmm. I had times that I sat down to write, and because I hadn't prepared, I didn't know what to do. So in that moment when you don't know, you're going to take the path of least resistance, no matter what.
Yeah.
Or, if you're stronger-willed than I am, you probably won't, but I'm not very strong-willed.
Yeah.
So in those moments, I was like, well, this will come to me later.
Yeah.
Let's see what John Oliver said this week.
Yeah.
Or let's see what the Vlog brothers are up to, or whatever, So, yeah, I think next year...
And for the record, the cool kids just call it a vlog.
They can call it whatever they want. VEE log.
Vlog.
That's how you spell it.
Sure.
So, well, I like I said last week, I've learned a lot in the process. I've learned a lot about putting this thing together and all that. So
I think that's important.
I'm pretty happy with the experience.
That's good. That's cool. Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I've been doing NaNoWriMo on and off for a few years, and every year it's November. It's such a terrible month to focus on writing. It just makes me insane. It's just like, every year it's always something goes on in November that it's just a time crunch. And then when I sit down to write, my head's racing in a million different directions, and I'm saying, well, I got to sit down and focus. And I just can't. Like, I feel like by focusing on NaNoWriMo, I am letting so many other things fall to the wayside. Yeah, and so it just makes me crazy. I just wish that they would do it in March. Just stop doing it in November, assholes.
They could still even call it NaNoWriMo.
Yeah.
All right, well, you want to talk about Star Wars?
Yeah, let's talk about some Star Wars.
Sweet. We'll be right back with Star Wars.
So, some Star Wars. We jump right in. We've been checking out this perspective on both trilogies that's called the Machete Order.
Yep.
And I think the reason for is because the way that this gentleman has sort of hacked up both trilogies and kind of reassembled them into a sort of sextuplet of films that are, or quintuplet,
yep,
of films that are a little more palatable for a new viewer to come in and kind of grasp the overall details. And the Machete Order is to watch episode 4, 5, then to cut back to episode 2, 3, and then jump to episode 6.
Correct.
And you're more or less cutting episode 1 out entirely. You don't have to, but it's not essential to the storyline necessarily. Right. But I think that if you're watching it with kids, I think that it is important to at least throw that in there because of the Darth Maul.
Well, and honestly, they like it.
Yeah.
Because a kid is the main character. The pod race, which just to me it reminded me of Ben-Hur. That's exactly what it is. But so I'll leave a link in the show notes and everything. But he went into meticulous detail about why this is a good way to watch it, and it hinges mostly on the idea that something we'll get to later. The story of Star Wars is about Luke, not about Anakin, and
which I personally disagree with. But
I now do as well. Yeah. But that was the idea. So saying that Anakin doesn't have an interesting story arc basically is because he gives in to the temptation of the dark side just readily and easily, almost like
it's lazy.
Yeah.
And I get it that we're in a generation of armchair critics, and and everybody has an opinion, and God damn it, you have to at least respect it, even though most of people's opinions are stupid. And I've gone at length about this because I'm a huge supporter of episodes 1, 2, and 3. I think that they're genius. There are things that I disagree with. The Jar Jar thing was a disaster. It was unfortunate that he was involved, but even then, he was still a massively important character to the overall story. It was his sort of foolishness that led to a lot of things happening. I mean, he was a real plot device character, and I still think he was ridiculous, but he could have been served in a million different ways. so much better than what he was. But we're talking about children's films.
Yeah,
and that's the problem, is when you get these hardline people who are my age, your age, and a little bit older, who grew up with the first trilogy, they're coming in with 20, 30 years of jaded film mentality,
right?
Walking into these episodes 1, 2, and 3, and they're treating them as if they expect the same incredible experience that they had when they were children as jaded adults, and
right.
and that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so for me, the Machete order is, I think it's fine, at least for the overall storyline, because the purpose of it is to essentially give you the first the taste of Star Wars as originally intended, by starting you off at episode 4, leading you up to episode 5, which, spoilers, is when you find out that Vader is actually Luke's father, and then you jump back to see the rise of Anakin Skywalker and the transformation into Vader, and then you jump to Jedi, where you see Vader's ultimate redemption and the rise of Luke as the sort of culmination of the Jedi prophecy.
Yeah. I think real quick, the idea of the Machete order is Machete order is to bring it to new viewers. So if you got kids or whatever, and you want to take them to see The Force Awakens with you when it comes out soon, you show them 4 and 5 first, because you don't want that moment which we take for granted now, because it's been parodied. Mm-hmm. It's so derivative now. But that scene in Cloud City where Vader reveals to Luke that he is his father. Mm-hmm. You don't want that spoiled with the first trilogy. So if you start them at 1, 2, 3, that's not there when you get to the end of 5. You don't have any idea. No. And so that's really the impetus, I think, a lot of the idea behind watching it this way.
Yeah.
And I think that for me personally, I gained this whole new appreciation of episode 2, mm-hmm. watching it in this order. Now, that may be a lot of things. It may be a confluence of things. But watching it in this order, I watched episode 2, which I previously had watched one time, mm-hmm. and did not care for probably a lot of reasons, but we'll get into some of those later. Yeah. But I watched it this time, and I was like, this is an hour of a buddy cop movie, mm-hmm. and then it's a mystery movie.
Yeah.
Like, it's great.
Yeah, it's a sort of sci-fi, almost kind of noir, mm-hmm. kind of thing. Yeah. And, and I loved it. I thought it was great. I thought that Obi-Wan looked a little weird in it for some reason. There were scenes that, like, you would see, Ewan McGregor, and you'd be like, "Are you actually Ewan McGregor right now? You look like Psycho for some reason."
Yeah.
But
yeah, it was interesting to me to watch it in that order, and I tried to get my 8-year-old on board, and this is the harsh reality right here, is that I started her off with episode 4, and she was just kind of like, I'm a little bored, I'm going to go color, or I'm going to go put together some Legos. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, come in here and watch episode 5. It's awesome. And then same thing.
Yeah.
And then I have episode 1, and then episode 2 on, and then episode 3 on, and she's like, what is going on? And I'm like, well, here's the story. And she's like, she just looks at me with her mouth open, like, I cannot believe you just ruined that for me. I'm like, I tried to get you to watch all these with me. What do you want from me?
Yeah.
But she was all on board with the storyline when I explained it to her. Mm. And when she had watched the visuals from those first 3 movies, and just, these are not boring, which saying that's almost feels sacrilegious to myself, about the first 3, but it's definitely an interesting way to watch them. And I think especially like you said, for people that are jaded about the original trilogy, which I was. My movie-going experiences for both the first two were awful because I went and saw them on opening night. My own fault. But just giving them another chance, and I've always liked Episode 3. Always. I've seen that one a few times. But giving those first two another chance, I still didn't like Episode 1. But Episode 2, I liked it a lot. A lot.
Yeah.
Seeing it again this time.
Yeah. And for me, I know that a lot of the heat that comes towards Star Wars is, especially with, Episodes 1, 2, and 3, is this kind of relentless assault on George Lucas as the writer/director, and that, he shouldn't have done it and he should have passed the buck like he did the first time.
Yeah.
And, and I'm totally, I'm totally ambivalent towards that view because, to say that George Lucas is a bad director, well, I'm sorry, but money clearly says that you're wrong.
Yeah.
You are not just wrong, you are stupid wrong.
Yeah.
And to consider that he created two of the biggest pop culture icons in the last, 40 years now?
Yeah.
Close to. Yeah, Indiana Jones and, Star Wars. I'm sorry, but, you want to talk smack about George, you got to go through Star Wars and you've got to go through Indiana Jones.
Right.
And even if you go, oh, Crystal Skull was stupid, you're dumb. It was a great movie. It was a blast. It was fun. I don't know what you want. If you think that these movies are supposed to change your life, then you've got a problem. You should be able to just sit down and go, yeah, this movie was a blast. It was fun. So
yeah, and if you sit down and you make every attempt to just wash away your preconceived notions, your experiences from seeing them the first time, and just take in the story, there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
I cannot sit here and defend Episode 1. I'm sure you can, better than I can. I did not care for it. I thought the only redeeming quality of it was the score, the saber fighting, and Liam Neeson.
Well, it set the bar for what was to come in a way that you couldn't have done with Episode 4 back in the day.
Yeah.
And what Episode 1 did was it said that everything that you thought you knew about the Jedi and about, what they're all about and all that stuff is just dead wrong. And so what you get to see are thriving relationships between Master and Padawan, but you also get to see an extremely vibrant and active role in the universe as characters who carry a lot of heft and a lot of gravitas everywhere they go. Jedi aren't like cops. They're not like soldiers. They're more like, like sort of Dalai Lama-esque, figures of some kind of deep-rooted spiritual authority who command this faceless, power that allows them to be functionally superhuman in a world full of aliens and monsters and craziness. And by setting the bar that way, by utilizing Darth Maul, was I happy Darth Maul got dropped in Episode 1? No. But I was also a fan of the Clone Wars cartoons that came out, where you find out that, he didn't bite it. He gets to come back and he has a really cool storyline, later on in the Clone Wars where, he has an entirely robotic lower half, and it's really interesting. It's a really cool character. But, it set the bar so that if you're coming in at Episode 1 with no idea what Star Wars is or what it means, it gives you the foundation of what the Jedi are, why they are, and that Jedi follow a sort of fate that may or may not necessarily be something that they can control or something that is going to be good for them, but they do what they do because they know that to not do what that force tells them to do is to invite destruction across the board.
Right.
And, by using Qui-Gon, who was a character who exemplified the ideals of knighthood and, and in his own right, a sort of realism behind the chivalry, to be a character who will cheat a little bit to get the job done, but isn't going to just roll in with the lightsaber, bust that bad boy out, and be like, wah, wah, do what I tell you to do.
I'm not here to free slaves.
Yeah. And the thing is that when you get to the end of episode 1, if you walk away with anything, take Jar Jar out of the equation. People like to throw up this, it's about this trade route thing and, this blockade and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, stop being dumb. Look at what's going on. This is about Palpatine setting up his inevitable rise to power. And he's using this particular planet to set that ball in motion. That's going to put him out into the limelight. That's going to allow him to ascend to become the emperor that we all were terrified of when we were kids. And we saw him in hazy, holograms, and then inevitably in that chair, where you're watching everyone outside that window getting smoked.
Right.
By giving the background of this Trade Federation dispute with Naboo and by giving that any time in your head other than it's just Palpatine manipulating, you're being intellectually disingenuous to yourself. And that's just such a massive waste of time.
Well, I think that where the whole Trade Federation quagmire, where you can call to it and say, yeah, what's going on? Why is this like this? It's because it's convoluted. Yes, it all boils down to Palpatine's rise, right? But the way it's set up and the way it's presented is not as... That's what it is. That's what it is underneath. And that's what it should be underneath. Because it's supposed to be going on under the covers.
My thing with that, though, is that the convolution of that, the convoluted nature of the way that they present it to you, is to show you how skilled Palpatine is.
Yes.
And so that when you start to see that character moving up, and you get to episode 2, then episode 3, and you realize that he has many sinister fingers in many, many sinister pies, and you start to realize that even before we saw him in episode 1, he was manipulating arguably a galaxy full of clear-minded beings who were just looking after what they felt like was the right thing to do.
Right.
And he was still moving them around like chess pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I know that there was, especially at the time, there was a lot of stuff about the, what they called Nemoidians, I think, all having Asian accents and, and all that nonsense. And it's like, give me a break. Yeah. But the thing about episode 1, besides ramping up the visuals and ramping up the excitement factor, which is something that, when we sat down last week and we watched episode 4, as fond as I am of that movie, I just kept thinking to myself, I really just want to see some lightsabers, and,
Man, I wish they would have invented green screen by now.
Yeah, you know. I just keep saying to myself, man, you know, this, as cool as this is, I just want to see some cool stuff happening. You know, just give me some Jedi.
Yeah,
and
that's a lot of the strength of the first three movies to me, is because there's so much Jedi.
Yeah,
and there's so much surrounding Palpatine. The first movies got, to me, too much fluff that does not surround those things. Mm-hmm. But you know, you got it's so obvious, like it slaps you in the face, the virgin birth thing and the, you know, the Christ thing, and it's like, I mean, does it need to be that in your face right away? You know, there's all kinds of there's little details all throughout it. Like that's where they introduced the midichlorian thing, and they only came back to it one other time in the first trilogy.
The strength on the midichlorian thing for me was that it showed that the Jedi, like anyone, like any religious order or any group of clear-thinking people, is that you have people who tend to view the world spiritually, and then you have people who tend to view the world actually. And the Jedi are no different. There are Jedi who have a deeply spiritual perspective on the Force, and then there are Jedi who have a scientific perspective on the Force. And the idea in science that everything, all the four fundamental forces of the universe, have a carrier wave that carries them and allows them to interact with the universe itself, that being sort of mirrored in the Force, that the Force has a carrier and that it's the midichlorian. And, you know, so for me, it was just, okay, cool. There are scientists Jedi.
Yes.
And then there are spiritual Jedi. And I was completely fine with that.
But I think my perspective is, and I think that was disliked, you know, uniformly, basically. But I wanted more of that, and they didn't return to it much. Yeah. And I don't know if that's because it was crapped on at the time or anything like that.
What I think a lot of it was that it was intended to just kind of be there to say, you know, that there is a biological component to the Force. And that by ascribing a count to it, you sort of have that almost Dragon's Ball Z kind of, you know, it's over 9,000, you know, kind of craziness about it, where, you know, you could say that Yoda represented the pinnacle of what the midichlorian count was until Anakin showed up.
Right. and that's. And I think that's cool too, in a sense, because it helps to explain the passing down the Force to your offspring, essentially.
Yeah,
which is huge, an enormous part of the original trilogy.
Yeah, and also with what you were saying about, what were you? About the virgin birth.
Yeah.
What I loved was, I think it was episode 2, where they're at the opera. And they're sitting down, and he tells the story of Darth Plagueis. Mm-hmm. And because if you read the expanded...
It was 3. That was episode 3.
Was it 3?
Yeah.
When you read about the expanded stuff, you find out that Darth Plagueis wasn't an ancient Sith Lord. He was the Sith Lord that Sidious was apprenticed to right up until about episode 1. And so when you find out that he had done this grand experiment to create life, and you realize that he did, and he built Anakin, you know, from the ground up, but through this virgin birth scenario. And so you're like, okay, well, so he's already, I mean, by design, he is the virgin of the Force, as the Jedi had predicted.
Right.
But he's also designed by the Sith. And so was he really the virgins of the Force? Or was he an attempt to hijack the virgins? You know, to design your own prophecy. You know, a self-fulfilling one. because, knowing that Anakin was essentially created by Darth Plagueis, at least in theory, then he's already been tainted by the dark side, just from the get-go. Right. So, of course, he was going to fall in line the way that he was going to. It was predestined, in a way. And, and that falls into the greater scheme of things later on with the Emperor and the Skywalker line being sort of universally tainted by the dark side.
But it also lends that whole religious overtone too, where Anakin, yes, might have been created by a force of the dark side, but then he had an opportunity, the free will opportunity, right? So that's what humans have.
Yeah, obviously.
And Luke the same, but Luke probably had more good in him in the end, because of Padme and all that. But that whole idea of the free will, Anakin still could have taken the path to not cut down Windu, basically, when he did, and save the Emperor. He still could have done that, and it would have been fine.
Yeah. I think that, and for me, it's my own kind of conspiratorial thing, is that when you go back and you rewatch the episodes 1, 2, and 3, and if you're careful and you pay attention, every time the Emperor says, "I feel like the Jedi are trying to do blank," whatever, and his little planting the seeds in Anakin, almost universally you see Mace Windu offering up those options as a rational path to solving a problem. And what I kind of wonder is if they design Windu as a character that was actually trying to put the Jedi Order in control of everything. And it's hard to kind of figure that out for sure, because no one ever really, kind of says anything, Windu ends up biting the bullet anyway, so you're just like, all right, fine. But, the aggressiveness that he had towards going after the Emperor, or after Palpatine, and the consistent way that the Windu character kept offering up these things.
Immediately the next scene. I get that. I think the only thing that would probably keep me to stray from that idea, or to agree with you, is that, and there's no basis for this, but it's that Yoda he always knew what was going on.
No.
Except for what was shrouded by the dark side. So in my mind, Yoda never would have gone along with that.
Yeah.
He never would have said, okay, fine. Now, and then you could say there that Windu maybe knew that shroud was up and he could start acting independently of Yoda or whatever. But yeah, I think that maybe there was some of that in Windu, but ultimately it was a service to the Republic thing. Yeah. And maybe, too, it could have been a benevolent idea. Like, this is how we can best serve the Republic.
Yeah.
As if we are in control of everything. Because shit is cray-cray.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's interesting, though. I hadn't thought about that. So, we've talked before for an entire podcast about the hero's journey. And we cited The Wizard of Oz, The Matrix, and Star Wars as three of our big examples of that at work.
Yeah. Also Dark City.
And I don't think we brought that up.
Well, no, I mean, I'm just throwing that. Dark City is also a almost textbook hero's journey.
With Craig Bierko?
Maybe.
Craig Bierko's Dark City? The bad guy from The Long Kiss Goodnight? Okay, let's move along. So, the hero's journey, what is it? All that good stuff.
What's it all about?
Yeah, so it's Joseph Campbell's idea of how mythology has traveled down through the ages for humans, and how the stories have always kind of followed the same pattern, right? And there's tons written on Lucas becoming friends with Joseph Campbell after he made the first trilogy, and how.
Well,
and
it was
saying,
actually before.
Oh, it was before.
Yeah, he went to school with Joseph Campbell, and Joseph Campbell informed a lot of Star Wars. Like there was a lot of times, at least according to the scriptures, is that there were times that George Lucas would actually go to Joseph Campbell and say, "I've got this story, and I'm at this point where I'm not really sure what's going on," and then Joseph Campbell would vomit forth his knowledge of all things story and guide him into, well, here you need this character. You don't have this character. This character's pivotal to the story, and thus Obi-Wan was born, and etc. So as I understood it, is he read Hero with 1,000 Faces when he was in college, maybe, and then whatever. I'm in college, and then he sat down to write his opus, and he read Hero of 1,000 Faces again, and that's when he sought out Joseph Campbell. But that may be wrong. I don't know how big of an impact that book had on him, but Star Wars was definitely the result of that relationship. Yeah. Hands down. Yeah.
So the original trilogy follows the hero's journey pretty much to a T.
Yeah.
It doesn't...
It's almost defined... I mean, you can define it as the hero's journey.
Yeah. What about when you throw in the Anakin part of the story?
I think what you have with Anakin is an extended sort of negative version of the hero's journey, where Anakin's journey, instead of him having an Obi-Wan, which, I mean, he did obviously have an Obi-Wan, but his mentor was not Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan was a big brother, was a friend, a partner. Palpatine was a mentor. And one of the few flaws that I will openly admit to is that they didn't expand on that mentorship as much as they should have. But when you find out just how deep Anakin was with the Emperor, or with Palpatine, and you realize that he was subtly manipulating Anakin in a way that would inevitably turn him into what he needed him to be. The replacement for Dooku. You find that his journey is a dark reflection of Luke's. I think purposefully. Obviously, purposefully. Where Luke's crucibles were, the cave in Dagobah, and then the inevitable battle between himself and Jabba's crew, and then going back after another Death Star. All that good stuff. You can find fairly clear, flip sides.
Yeah.
To those
those
battles.
The mirroring is prevalent.
But it's through it's through the looking glass darkly. It's not quite hands on, but it is the hero's journey. But it's just what happens when that journey ends in ruin. And I think that it's particularly poignant when you get to those ending sequences in episode 3, where he's being rebuilt as Vader, and when he gets to that scene that a lot of people kind of laugh at, but where he asks about Padme, and the Emperor says, "You killed her," and and he loses his mind, and it's like, well, You know, like the journey is complete. You know, like you're done. You know, the singular force that could have pulled you out is gone. Yeah. And you know, had he known that he had children, that they were the last sort of lights left over from Padme, would he have still turned? Would he have turned back from the dark side?
Right.
You know, and it was the manipulations of the Emperor that made it so kind of deliciously, you know, poignant at the end for me.
Yeah.
You know, and
well, you could just sit there and say to yourself, what a jerk.
Yeah.
You know, there's some jerkery going on here. And
yeah.
It was definitely interesting to watch that.
Yeah.
And especially knowing what's to come.
Yeah.
You know?
And also, though, knowing that Anakin wasn't just some Jedi. You know, Anakin went to war. You know, he fought in the Clone Wars for many, many, many years. And, you know, he did many, many, many things. Some heroic, some horrific. But, you know, so that once he becomes Vader and you realize why everyone is so terrified of him. Now, in the original films, what you had were people who sort of thought of him as an archaic, like a relic of an older age, some kind of weird, you know, monk of some kind. But, you know, him just force choking the shit out of every single person that pissed him off.
Going through admirals like underwear.
Yeah. He's just like, well, you know, that's another dead admiral. You know, and so, you know, once you're armed with the information of episodes 1, 2, and 3, and then the Clone Wars, and you know, and that's the thing is, if you've never watched those Clone Wars cartoons, man, you know, yeah, they're kid stuff, but man, occasionally they drift into some real adult material, and you know, and they're genius when they do, and it's so good, and you see such cool stuff that you just would have never known about Star Wars, you know, and if you've got the time and you can handle watching, you know, that kind of cartoon fare, which I know a lot of people don't have the stomach for, and that's totally cool. You don't need it, but you should watch it if you're going to allow yourself to have an opinion on the whole, you know, before you say a word to anyone about how much Star Wars is good or how much it sucks. You know, you should watch all of it, you know, and really be informed. You know, because that hero's journey, it doesn't just stop with episode 3 and then pick up again at episode 4. You have that whole in between with the Clone Wars where the hero's journey is just rolling along and it just keeps on going. And, you know, you see the equivalent of the Trials of Hercules and, you know, the epics of Gilgamesh and all these other classic heroes' journeys, you know, Orpheus going into hell and all those things. They're all there. But what's cool is that they're juxtaposed from Anakin to, you know, seeing the hero's journey of Obi-Wan, even Yoda, you know, Windu, all these other characters. You get to see them go through these trials and crucibles, so that once you get to, you know, episode 4 and you see the hell that they've been through with these Clone Wars, when Luke says, you know, you served in the Clone Wars with my father, and you know, you go, that was a rough time. Yeah, you know, like,
rather than it just being
it's just some phrase that you don't know. You know, like,
I mean, you can get that impression a little bit from the films.
Mm-hmm.
Between the second and third films is when that supposedly happens. But you can get that impression from then, because I mean, really, all hell breaks loose between the droid army and the clone army, and you get to see a little bit of that, especially at the end of Attack of the Clones, which I thought was really strong.
Yeah.
And poor Christopher Lee, man. That guy, man. He was so awesome.
He has such presence.
Oh my gosh.
And no matter what he does.
Yes.
And it's that voice that that is just so like if it were real and I were in a room with Dooku and he was like I'm going to kill you now, I'd be like, can you say that again? That sounded wonderful.
You sounded just like him.
You'd be like, oh my god, this is great.
Yeah,
one of the cool things though about Dooku is a lot of people say, oh well, he was an ancillary, pointless character. They threw him in for no reason. And you kind of go, well, yeah, he was thrown in, maybe to show, to show that there is a negative side to being a Jedi, because he was a renegade. He was a former Jedi who had broken away and gone off to do his own thing. But, the really cool thing about Dooku in relation to everything else was that he showed what Jedi could be if they weren't controlled properly by the Jedi code. And if you had that kind of power, you'd be at the head of a droid army yourself. And the idea that Palpatine used Count Dooku to develop the means to build a Vader by experimenting on Grievous.
Yeah.
And so that Grievous is a proto-Vader. I always thought was a really interesting kind of take on things.
Yeah.
Grievous was a genius character. He was really powerful. He was really cool.
Yeah.
But ultimately, he was just there to prove the technology so that when the day came, Vader could be what
rebuilt.
Vader.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I agree. That was so. That's a little bit of I guess before we finish the hero's journey part where Luke goes through it all. In the end, Vader redeems himself.
Mm-hmm.
So Luke isn't the one who strikes down evil.
No, but that's the thing. In the hero's journey, the hero is almost never the one who strikes down the evil at the end. Usually, in the hero's journey, the evil consumes itself. And that's the thing that a lot of people don't necessarily realize, and it is a touchy thing, because the hero can't kill, even if it's the good guy, even if it's the most evil guy there. If he kills him, then he's no better than he is. So the villain has to consume himself, and you see that at the end of the Harry Potter series. You see it at the end of all kinds of the hero's journey. Things. It's always that the villain or villains consume themselves either through their own greed or their own avarice, whatever, that their own, fears and all these things inevitably are the things that destroy them, and that the hero is often just there to witness, to bear witness to the villain's destruction. And it was the same thing in Star Wars, to have Luke, who had become the hero of this hero's journey, to see him, vulnerable and beaten when Vader rises up and redeems himself by destroying the Emperor. It was really, if you knowing the hero's journey like I do now, had I watched it back then, I would have predicted it and been like, well, this sucks, but
nailed it.
Yeah, but now I can watch it and I can appreciate it, because it is a classic journey or ending for the hero's journey.
Yeah. Well, it's neat now to see what they did with the newest trilogy, the first 3 films, and say, Vader, and then in the end, Vader does get that basically revenge on Palpatine.
Yeah,
which takes us right into what my next point is. Is Star Wars the story of Anakin Skywalker or Luke Skywalker?
I
guess I should
ago,
say Darth Vader.
20 years ago, I'd have said it was a story of Luke. But now I think it's definitively the story of Anakin. Because even though when episodes 4, 5, and 6 come into play and Vader becomes a background character who really only makes appearances as the bad guy, what you still see is a continuous growth of Vader when he realizes that he has a son. And, the first thing that he says is, take my hand and we'll rule the galaxy, father and son. Not, you will serve me.
Right.
No, it's, we will do this together. We'll overthrow the Emperor and we'll do this together. And, and so in his subsequent reappearances, the idea that they would move him by freezing him in carbonite as opposed to just smoking him. You see that Vader is impaired by the idea of Luke. Yeah. That the darkness is not necessarily as deeply ingrained as you would have thought.
Right.
And the idea that he doesn't kill Luke in that fight in Cloud City, and that he, I would say arguably allows him to escape. Because, if you're telekinetic and your son falls off of the dumbest place you could imagine. Yeah, they're like, we're going to put this thing out here in the middle of a giant tube that goes down miles.
They had lots of those in Star Wars.
Yeah, it's just like, what? Who built these things? But
Darth Maul fell down one.
Yeah, and the thing is that, if you're telekinetic and you're one of the most powerful force wielders of all time, and your kid's like, oh no, and falls, you go, I got you, bud. You don't go, no, oh, and then just walk away like Vader did,
Yeah.
So,
Well, and it never seemed like in Jedi he had any doubts about Luke still being alive. And I know that comes a lot from being able to feel his presence and everything like that. But I would have swore until I watched them in this order, and I think those unintended consequences of Machete's write-up, but I would have swore that was incorrect. That this was the hero's journey, bullet-pointed, everything of Luke Skywalker. And it is. The original trilogy.
Episodes 4, 5, and 6 are definitely Luke's story. But in context.
And when you throw in the first 3, or even just 2 and 3, the first trilogy, you throw that in, and then you get Vader's redemption at the end. It is the Anakin Skywalker show. And now we got 3 new sets of films that look like, from the trailers, they're going to feature the spirit of Darth Vader. I mean, it just keeps going, right? So I never would have been able to hear that argument that this is the Anakin Skywalker story ever. But now, after watching them again, objectively, forgetting my past experiences with the movies, everything like that, I have come around and said, hey, that's right. That's correct.
Yeah. And if I were to make a prediction, which I don't want to do, but
You're going to.
Yeah, I'm going to. But if I were going to make a prediction, I would say 2 things about this next trilogy. That, first of all, what we're going to see is, like in episode 2, the scene that made you insane while watching it live, the Yoda, fight.
Yes.
I honestly feel like we're going to get a Leia moment.
Yes.
Like that. Because the idea of empowering that character even further with Force
Well, and that's the thing. Yeah, she should theoretically have Force powers now, right?
Yeah. And so I think that we're going to see that. And I think that it will be pretty brilliant when it happens.
And I'll be happy to be in an empty theater.
Yeah.
Rather than a full one.
Yeah. And then I also feel like that this story will be a means for this Kylo Ren character to ultimately resurrect Vader and allow for Vader to sort of return as a almost Christ-like figure. That he died and comes back to complete the destruction of the empire that he built. And I don't know how they're going to do it. I don't care whether they clone him, whether it's a Force ghost that comes to visit Luke or these new kids, whoever they may be. I honestly feel, though, that the completion of this trilogy of trilogies has to fall on either Luke or Anakin, and I'm hoping that it's Anakin, that this Kylo Ren character is collecting artifacts of Vader to rebuild Vader, and that Vader will return, but not as what Kylo Ren and these other characters are hoping, as a Darksider. I think he'll come back as a Lightsider, and I believe, at least for right now, that gives you a degree of symmetry, on the trilogy of trilogies,
right? And
I honestly feel like that it's essential to rebuild the what people feel like they may have lost from episodes 1, 2, and 3. And I feel like, hopefully by the end of episode 1, we have some kind of, confirmation on that. Where, the return of Vader to destroy the remnants of the empire that he built. And I hope that that's the case. And if it's not, hey, whatever, I'm wrong. What have you.
That's an interesting prediction, though, especially because it takes into consideration the religious overtones.
Yeah.
So the resurrection thing, and the idea that he is the chosen one. He's the one who's supposed to bring balance to the Force, right? Well, that we're still having movies, so I think it's clear that hasn't happened.
Yeah,
and so that idea is, I think, a pretty sound one.
Yeah.
A pretty sound prediction, I would say.
Yeah, and I hope it comes to fruition so that I look super awesome. But if it doesn't, hey, what have you? Just another crazy idea.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
but I'm stoked about the movie, the new one. I'm stoked. I'm so happy that it's coming out. Just because I sat down, I said, "Hey, let's do a Star Wars podcast." And you're like, "All right, let's do a Star Wars podcast." Yeah. And then I was like, all right, let's watch all the movies in the machete order. And then we did, and I'm so happy that I did, and that I gained this new appreciation, and that I know more about storytelling now, and that I was able to say, hey, this is awesome, this is awesome, this is awesome, and link all of these different things together.
Yeah. I feel like, and nobody's seen the new films yet, so
George Lucas has.
Well, yeah, but
and a terminally ill guy.
Yeah,
which that was awesome.
Yeah, which is so cool.
Yeah,
but we, at least the general public at large, nobody knows what's going to happen,
right?
And I admit that I look at the new Star Wars stuff with a degree of apprehension. I'm not sold on the characters. The idea of bringing back Han and Leia and Chewie, hey, I'm down. Cool, whatever. I don't care how old they are. But, I just kind of wonder when I see the trailers and all that stuff if what we're in for is a lot of fluff or if what we're in for is going to be a real serious sort of study on what's come before in that J.J. Abrams way that's, You know, because, I mean, if you watched the Star Trek films, I mean, like, from the get-go, it's like, run, shit, it's over.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, both of those movies were that way, and, I mean, it was exhausting to watch them.
Yeah, I haven't seen the second one, but the
second one is great.
Yeah.
It is, and it's even worse than the first when it comes to that run, you know, thing. But, you know, I think that it's I think that it's cool that they're developing a new crew of Star Wars for a new generation. I think that it's time. It's a good idea, you know, and you know, I just hope that the film doesn't get ruined by the internet.
Oh well,
you know,
yeah. I mean, that's just
because
yeah.
If George Lucas were making this film, it would have been shit canned already.
Yeah.
You know, but because JJ's doing it, people still have faith in JJ. And this might be what breaks the bank in that faith in JJ. Who knows? But the thing is that, you know, like, the internet has the worst reputation for wrecking really, really cool things before anyone has even seen them. Mm. You know, just the constant, you know, bullshit that comes out of, you know, well, here's my theory, and you know, I have my own theory, I admit it, but you know, up until now, I had not spoken about it, you know, and you know what you just keep seeing is the internet just destroying everything that's wonderful. You know, just in the world, everything that's wonderful.
We love you, internet.
Yeah, you know, and you know, I just worry that, you know, that Star Wars, I mean, and it won't, obviously, but I still have that gut feeling that once the movie comes out, that next morning I'm going to log into Facebook and there's going to be all kinds of genuine, understanding, kind-hearted people who are going to go, you know what, I saw the movie, it was really cool, I enjoyed it. And then you're going to see all those fanboys who are going to be like, it sucked. It sucked.
It was awful.
It was crap.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm just going to be like, God damn it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, just you know, allow yourself to go and enjoy it.
Yeah.
You know, like there's no reason to be upset about it. It's Star Wars. It's just a cool movie franchise.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I'm not going to see it opening night. I'm not going to see it opening weekend.
Me neither.
I want to see it, like, preferably if I can pull it off, I want to see it the Monday after.
I'm going to go see it on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
At night. Because I feel like there won't be a lot of people there.
Yeah,
Don't anybody steal that idea.
Yeah. Yeah. You're dumb.
I'm dumb.
Yeah. I'm gonna try and see it as early. Like like if they have like a 9 a.m. showing, I'm gonna be there, you know, at 8 a.m. to see it, because the earlier the better. The more nerds I can get, I can avoid, you know, all that shit. I'm more than happy. You know, I if I had the money, I'd buy out a whole theater.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. That would be awesome. All right, well, you got anything else on Star Wars?
I think if you want to watch the Machete order,
yes.
Once again, you're going to watch episode 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, and then 6. And when you do watch it with an open mind, and if you're absolutely hell-bent on avoiding Jar Jar, then just skip over episode 1. You know, and then when you're done, and if you've got time, jump on Netflix, look up Clone Wars, and just start it at season 1, and just let it run through. You know, I mean, it'll take you a month, but you know, it's they're good stories, they're solid stories told in that universe, and you know, the animation starts off a little clunky, but it becomes absolutely gorgeous as the series progresses, they develop so many new techniques, which is another thing George Lucas
we didn't talk about that.
Yeah, like you put anything under his stable, and his people are going to find a way to reinvent the wheel over and over and over again, and just make something look so good.
Yeah.
But yeah, go through, check it out, and if you don't like it, well, maybe Star Wars isn't for you.
Well, I should say too, the new stable of books, and you've mentioned before how you think it's a shame that they've kind of pushed the other stuff to the Legends. It's not the expanded universe anymore. And I know a lot of people have talked about the Thrawn trilogy and stuff as being, man, you guys should have kept this in, But I've read Aftermath by Chuck Wendig, and that's I believe the only one that's out so far, and I think there's more.
I think there's a couple more out now.
Maybe there are. Okay, it's good. It's if you're a fan of Star Wars, it's worth a read. It's a visit to that world. It happens right after Jedi, and it introduces you to all kinds of new characters that I'm assuming we will have there will be some kind of imprint from them in the new films.
Yeah.
So it's worth a read. I enjoyed it. For a Star Wars book, it was good. All right, well, that covers Star Wars. You good with that?
Yeah, I think so. I think that we've had another definitive
definitive guide to Star Wars.
Like there's nothing that ever needs to be said about Star Wars again.
No, I don't think we could have covered anything else.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. I mean, other than like how to build an actual lightsaber.
Yeah.
But that's just...
I don't know. That's maybe another podcast. Maybe
when episode 2 comes out.
There you go.
Or episode 8.
Look forward to that. So, once again, just to finish it off here, a little bit of housekeeping. We are going to take a little bit of a break until after the new year. This is the end of Friday Night Rights Season 1. This is our 9th podcast, which I feel like there's been a lot more than that.
Well, technically there's been 10.
Yeah. Technically.
Yeah.
We lost one. But anyway, so we really appreciate anybody who's kept up with us for these last, probably 4 months or so, 3 or 4 months. We've enjoyed doing this. It hasn't been a grind to me. Yeah. I've really enjoyed.
Yeah, it's been wonderful
putting this together.
And I and if you are listening, we appreciate it. It's not, we're not blowing sunshine up your skirt. We're, it's just the God's honest truth. It's fun to be able to sit around and shoot the shit and talk about writing and talk about things that we enjoy and hopefully you enjoy them too. And if that's the case, give us a like. Tell us that you give a damn, and we appreciate it. For the next season, I've been kind of bouncing around a lot of ideas. One of the things that I've spoken to Jonesy about is that we're going to start producing some much smaller sort of things that are around 5 minutes long, where we'll sort of take concepts that we may have already addressed and we'll try and shorten them into much more digestible, quick kind of burst, media kind of stuff that hopefully, for those of you who aren't kosher sitting around for an hour and a half, 2 hours, listening to us drone on and on about nonsense, you'll be able to get it all in, really quick little bursts. And for next season proper, for the actual podcasts, I really feel like that we're going to start finding very specific themes for the episodes.
Yeah.
And we're going to really kind of attack them with a little more laser focus. Whereas this first season, obviously, we're just getting used to doing what we're doing. And we're having a good time with it, and we run off on tangents and do a lot of silly stuff. But I think next time around, we're going to stay real focused on the task at hand and try to provide as much information and as much maybe education is a good word. Maybe, even though it's coming, from guys who, are really just doing our best to stay above water. But, we've got a lot of stuff in store, and hopefully next season will be the season that we attack a series of fairly large kind of ideas where we're going to get into the narrative behind certain concepts and things that are out there in the media, and we're going to try and figure out how story works when it's used maybe against people, and maybe maybe inform people a little more than we have been. Yeah. But either way, we've got a whole lot of stuff planned up for this next season, and we're really looking forward to getting back into the swing of things and hopefully nailing Sean Ed to the chair across the way here so that he has to show up for every episode.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but yeah, we want to thank everybody who stuck with us and everybody who, came along for an episode or two. Every little bit helps.
Yeah, so our aim is to be back after the new year with a whole new season, all new content, everything like that. In the meantime, though, take a look at the website, FridayNightWrites.net. Get involved. Start telling your own stories on there. Start providing feedback for stories you read on there. We're super, super focused on growing that also after the new year and up to the new year. So that's a big focus of mine, especially right now.
Yeah.
You can always catch us on Facebook at facebook.com/FNWrites, Twitter at twitter.com/FNWrites, YouTube at youtube.com/FNWrites. Our podcast feed is podcasts, plural.FridayNightWrites.net. On iTunes, you can find us under Friday Night Writes if you just search for that. And then if you'd like to provide feedback, comments, hate mail, anything, praise, any of that good stuff, fnwrites@gmail.com. And if you enjoy this podcast, please tell your friends. And thank you very much for listening to Season 1.
Yep, we appreciate it, everybody. See you around.
She's the kind of girl you dream of keeping home.